Okay, it looks like we've got everybody in that's going to come in. And if folks join us a little bit later, that's fine. We're just kind of getting the logistics going to begin with. So thank you for joining us. This is a webinar on our adult literacy management and leadership training courses. My name is Todd Evans. I'm going to be doing the majority of the presentation today. I'm accompanied by Patty Celadon and Sarah Howell. Sarah is the project manager of the leadership training courses, and Patty has been one of the course developers and is developing the next round of courses. So they're going to be looking for your questions and answering them as we go along. Just so we can kind of keep track of everything that's going on, I'm going to ask you that if you are having any technical problems, please use the chat function to take care of that. But if you have questions about the content of the courses or anything related to what we're talking about, use the Q&A function to ask those questions, to type them in. We do have over 100 people, so it's doubtful that we're going to be able to unmute people and take questions that way. So type your questions in. It allows us to answer them either by typing or keeping track of them so we can answer them in person. Let's see. So let's go ahead and get started. And just to begin, kind of talking about these courses and why we developed them is one of the things that we've kind of recognized in our work with literacy programs and supporting you guys is that folks who come into that executive director position or the leadership position for their literacy program come into it in a variety of ways and really with a variety of skill sets. So kind of common stories are they've been a staff member for a while, probably in charge of instruction or student support or tutor support, something like that. They know a lot about instructional delivery, but not a lot about the responsibilities of an executive director. So things like creating a budget for the organization, managing grants and donation cycles, reporting to the board, those sorts of things. You also have folks that have worked for a nonprofit. Maybe even they've managed a nonprofit organization, but they've not worked in a literacy program before. So they have general knowledge about administrative stuff, but they don't know the staff positions, how they fit together to deliver service. They don't know the funding streams, where the money comes from, who are the foundations and folks like that out there. They don't have a kind of a good understanding of just how services are implemented, how we're working with volunteers. Our volunteers work very differently than volunteers in a lot of other programs, which are very short term. And then a lot of times you have folks that are coming into a crisis situation. So they may be from one of those two backgrounds or some other situation that they're coming into, but they're coming into a program where something is happening. The executive director left. She's been there for a long time. You don't have policies written down. You don't have kind of good infrastructure, budgeting and reporting processes in place. Maybe the organization's in a financial crisis. So kind of the primary audience is those new executive directors that are coming into programs in those situations to give them the background they need to be able to run their literacy program effectively. It's not just for new executive directors, because we have a lot of executive directors who have come into that role, and just like any other adult education student, they've come into that role. They've been in that role maybe for 5-10 years, developed a lot of skills, but still, because they never had that underlying foundation, there are gaps in what they know and what they've been able to do. So these are also appropriate for current executive directors who want to kind of plug in those gaps, those knowledge gaps, and round out their knowledge base. And then thirdly, it's for folks that are in leadership roles. So if you're an executive director and you're thinking in the next 5 years or so, I might retire, you have some folks in your literacy program that you think might be uh, effective to move into your place, this would be good courses for them as well. So we have two topics that are available right now. The first one is, well, let me back up a little bit. So to identify the topics that we wanted to address, we wound up surveying our field of executive directors and asked them basically what they felt comfortable doing in their role as executive director and what they needed help with. And then we kind of drilled that down to look at what would have been helpful when you first started, identifying more specific topics. And we came up with kind of 5 topic areas and then the details underneath them. So the first one is financial management. So we basically, everybody running a program realizes that sound financial management is really important for making sure your literacy program is going to be accountable to your community and that it's going to be around for years to come. So in this topic of financial management, you're going to learn about developing and managing a budget. You're going to learn about basic accounting principles. You're going to learn how to measure the financial health of your organization, how to create financial reports for your board, and some strategies for diversifying your funding sources. And I'm talking in terms of topics because each of these, it's not just necessarily an individual course. We kind of look at what the content areas are, and the topics may range from 1 to 3 courses in that topic. The next one that we have already is administrative management. This is also available now. So again, you kind of have executive directors that work with volunteers or staff before becoming director. They understand the instructional issues, but they haven't developed their administrative skills. So in this course, you learn about strategic planning. You learn how to develop policy and procedure manuals. You learn a little bit about managing payroll, insurance, family medical leave, negotiating contracts. You learn some strategies for data management. And then we give you a list of kind of annual reporting and compliance requirements. So when you step into that executive director role, you kind of know over the first year, here are the things that I need to pay attention to. Here are the reports I need to make sure we're producing and sending to the IRS and the paperwork that we're filing with our state offices and things like that. So those are the 2 courses that we have completed now and available for you. We have 2 more that Patty is in the process of managing the development of those, and I'll tell you they are written now, storyboarded. We're in the process of getting them into our online authoring tool, and we'll be ready to test them in about a month or so. And I'll talk a little bit more about that pilot testing process a little later in the webinar, because obviously the COVID situation that we have now has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into parts of it. So I'll address that more in a minute. But the next course is, or the next topic is human resources, basically recognizing that the strength of any literacy organization is going to be the staff that it has to help it carry out its mission. And that is paid staff. It's also volunteer staff. So we look at issues around employee recruitment, development, and recognition. And when we talk about employees, we mean paid staff, we mean volunteer staff, volunteer employees, and we mean contract employees, and kind of looking at how you can use those 3 different types of folks to carry out the mission of your organization. Again, we look at policy manuals and handbooks. We look at compensation and benefits, and how important it is to put a good compensation and benefits package together to be able to attract good talent, both in your community, and if you're an organization that needs to attract talent from outside of your community, how to be competitive. We look at employment law and compliance, and then finally we look at conflict resolution. And this human resource topic has um, three topics in it, has three courses in it. The next one is board governance. This is also in the development stages, already been written. We're in the process of producing it. So just kind of looking at the relationship between that executive director and the board, and kind of recognizing that the board is kind of a vital connection for that literacy program back into the community. So we look at different types of boards, stages of board development. We look at roles and responsibilities of the board members and the executive director and how those balance each other off. We look at how to organize your board to be more effective. We look at planning, strategic planning, operational planning, and succession planning. We look at the board's role in resource development, not just financial resources, but also kind of human resource development. So their role in creating an environment where you can attract good staff, and community resources. So the board's role in helping you network with other organizations and important players in your community. And then finally, the board's role in oversight. So these are the two courses we have in development. We have a planned a marketing course for development and release in fall of 2021. This was another area that our programs identified that they really needed help with. And so that's going to be looking at creating a marketing strategy, using social media, maintaining your website, understanding Google Analytics and what that can tell you about how you're effectively reaching people, ways to access free and paid advertising, how to find marketing help in your community, assuming that you don't have the opportunity or the resources to hire a marketing or PR director. Like, how can you get help with that? And then finally creating an annual report, which is a responsibility that organizations have, and just kind of showing you how to do that. We also, through the process of piloting those first two courses, the folks that participated in that pilot helped us identify two additional topics, crisis management and change management. And kind of the idea behind those two is, we already talked a little bit about crisis management. So kind of the idea of how to come into an organization that's in a staffing crisis, a financial crisis, a service crisis, and kind of deal with that crisis, settle things down, and be able to move forward. And then the change management is one around kind of recognizing that as a new executive director, you are coming into an organization that already has like a functioning infrastructure. Even if it's not functioning well, it has a way of doing things. So how do you come in and create an environment of change where you can bring everybody along in the vision that you have for the organization, and kind of create a good constructive environment of change. And so let's see, I'm going to stop right now and just see if we have questions. So it looks like we have a question: what will be the next step to take or sign up for these modules? I have a slide at the end that kind of lays out exactly what you need to do to sign up for those. And another person that says would love to see the marketing class faster than 2021. And we are developing these as quickly as possible. So I'm sure you're not the only one. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of change gears And I'm going to take this PowerPoint down, and instead I am going to show you a demonstration of some of the courses. So let me pull that down and pull this up. And okay, so these courses are on ProLiteracy Education Network. So the first thing you have to do is you'll have to create an account. We'll talk about that. Creating an account is free. Uh, so this is the adult literacy leadership training for administrative management. So let me just show you, this is the title slide. They're all narrated. So if you've taken any of our other courses, they follow the same basic format. There's content on the screen, there's a narration that goes along with it, and then there are a lot of resources. So I'll just kind of walk you through this and show you a few slides. So the first one I want to show you is, this is a slide about strategic planning. And so it basically tells you there are 5 types of strategic planning. I can click on each one of these and kind of learn more about that particular type, what it's used for. And then I also have in the resource section, I have a link to a website for strategic planning for nonprofits. So this is going to give me a good overview of those 5 types of strategic planning. But if I need to know more, I can click on this resource and go find a lot more in depth. Let's see, creating a policy and procedure manual. So this is part of the lesson. You'll see here, we're kind of walking you through the different steps of creating a policy and procedure manual. So one of the things that we recognize is that a lot of this is about teaching you a process. So you may know that something needs to be done, like creating a budget or creating policy manuals, but you don't really know how to go about doing it. So we try to give you a process that you can follow, keep it relatively simple. And then again, here's a link to a website to give you more information. And then we also will give you some examples. So here, after we've kind of given you the steps, we kind of tell you different things that you might find in a policy manual or a procedure manual. And then if you click here, it's going to take you to our another section on ProLiteracy Education Network, where we have some samples of policy manuals and employee handbooks and things like that. So you'll get to see examples from the field. Let's see. Family Medical Leave Act. So this is something that if you're running a literacy program, you need to know what the Family Medical Leave Act is. So this just kind of explains it pretty simply. You can read more about it here, but we also recognize one of the things that we deal with is there's kind of the federal law that governs everybody, but from state to state, they can tack on additional kind of employment requirements on any federal law. So the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, for example, kind of sets the baseline standard for what everybody has to do. But what you need to do is go and find out if your state has added on any additional benefits or requirements or things like that. So when that happens, we point you to resources where you can go and find out what the laws are in your state. And that's what you see in this second link right here. Data management, we talked about that. So here are kind of 4 basic options that a literacy program might have for data management, ranging from keeping all, if you're a small program, kind of keeping all your data on Excel spreadsheets, purchasing a relational database. If you get state funding, maybe you're required to report back into a state database, or maybe you use kind of multiple database solutions. So we kind of explore different ones of those, and then we give you some tips for keeping your data and kind of making those decisions about how you're going to collect your data. And then this one right here, maintaining nonprofit status. So this is kind of that list of your annual filing requirements. And this slide actually came out of our piloting process where one of our pilot projects programs said, you know what, I could have really used when I was an executive director. It's just a checklist that said, here are the things that I need to be aware of that I turn into the state so we don't lose our nonprofit status. So that's kind of where that came from. And so you see there's kind of the bulleted list, and then we break down the federal and state regulations. Okay, so that is the administrative management course. I want to do next the budgeting course. So with budgeting, I'm not going to show as much of this, but I wanted to point out, so the first thing we do is kind of walk you through the budgeting process. All right, and you'll see that there's a PDF that you can download that's the step to creating a budget. But you'll see over here in the menu that this first lesson really is just walking you through what those steps are. So you can download the PDF, but we're actually going to take you in and get you to try to walk you through creating that budget with the information from your own literacy program. We are also going to give you resources. So when we talk about one of the first things you're going to want to do is create a spreadsheet. We actually give you a spreadsheet so you can download it, and I've got it. I'm going to pull it up here. So this is what the spreadsheet from the course looks like. And you see the first thing that you see is just a blank budget with previous fiscal year, current, and next year's budget. So this is an Excel spreadsheet that you can kind of fill in the numbers yourself. You can edit it and change these categories, but it'll do all the calculations for you. You don't have to do them on your own. So it's just kind of a starting point, a template for you to be able to create a budget on your own. We also give you a budget for the Reading is a Really Good Thing literacy program. So as we're walking you through those steps, if you're not at a point where you can go through those steps on your own, we have kind of a sample data set from a small literacy program that we can walk you through. So we chose a small literacy program to show you the steps because we figured that would be easier for you to kind of understand the process. But then we also give you a really big urban literacy program budget. So this is for an example for a larger literacy program. I think the budget is actually over $1 million, yeah, 1.7 million, which some of our literacy programs have. So you get an opportunity to see the difference in the types of grants, the number of grants, the different staff people and budgets for staffing that they have and things like that. And then the rest is just kind of, this is a blank template for the larger literacy program. And then we show you how to track your expenses from month to month, kind of beginning with the the budget that you've planned and calculating the remaining for each of your categories, and to be able to predict budget surpluses and shortfalls. Okay, and so talking about that, so planning for budget cash flow shortages. So we give you here 3 strategies. Really the importance of sticking to the budget, developing a cash reserve, and taking out a commercial line of credit as strategies for dealing with those cash flows. We talk about resource diversification. So this is a section from data from our literacy programs. You know, you guys, a lot of you are ProLiteracy members, and you fill out that annual survey every year. That helps us collect data just like this. So we kind of look at where funding streams come from our literacy programs. And then we take a look at how diversified our literacy programs are. And you see, we have a lot of literacy programs that have like 6 or more funding sources. but we also have a lot of literacy programs that only have 2 or 3. And so it kind of gives you a way to evaluate how diversified your program is compared to other programs. And then we look at some strategies for diversifying. We take a look at your board and staff financial responsibilities, kind of what's the role of the board in managing your funding and what's your staff, and then creating a financial report. So actually one of our programs that participated in the uh, pilot said this was really helpful. She knew that she needed to give the board financial data at every meeting, but she didn't know like what financial data they would actually be interested in and how to present it in an engaging way. So having a sample financial report was very valuable for her. And then the last one, I'll just show you a few things from our accounting one. We're not trying to make you turn you into an accountant, but trying to give you a foundational knowledge so that you can understand where your program is financially and be able to have those conversations knowledgeably with your board and also with your accountant or your CFO or whoever it is that's kind of managing the day-to-day money. So just some examples. We talk about different types of accounting, cash accounting versus accrual accounting methodology. Your program probably, would probably already have an accounting methodology in place when you come in. Hopefully it does. Not always. One of our pilot programs did not. Um, so kind of understanding which one of those is best for you or which one you're actually using and kind of what the benefits or what the shortfalls of that particular accounting methodology are. Uh, we look at understanding the assets of your organization, and this is really important. And those of you who have done any fundraising or managing of budgets, you know it's very important to keep track of what part of your funding is unrestricted, meaning you can use it for anything, or what parts are restricted, either temporarily or permanently. And so whoever the funder was kind of dictated, this is what I want you to use that funding for. The unrestricted funding, that is kind of the holy grail of funding. It's what everybody's looking for. But if you're doing a lot of grants and things like that, those are typically restricted funds. And so you really have to understand how to put your budget together and keep track of those grant funds. Uh, we go into kind of two very important fiscal reports. The first is the balance sheet, and the second one is the income statement. We show you how to read a balance sheet and give you kind of a sample of a balance sheet. We talk to you about assets and liabilities, what those are and kind of how they show up in the balance sheet. And then we give you some ratios. And so like current ratio. So this is a ratio that you can calculate using your balance sheet that'll tell you how well your organization can meet your short-term financial obligations. So we kind of tell you, we give you a spreadsheet, we tell you how to calculate it, and then kind of show you an example. And so these are just kind of quick pieces of accounting information that you can use to get a kind of a sense of the financial health of your organization and be able to report on that financial health to your board. Let's see, let's look at this additional thing. So the other thing that we talk about is accounting software. So not everybody does their own accounting, or some people do. So we kind of talk about um, maybe people know about QuickBooks, but we kind of give you some other options, some that are good for nonprofit accounting, some options that are free, and then kind of walk you through some considerations for, what are kind of the best options for you in terms of keeping your books, doing it yourself, using accounting software, hiring an accountant or a chief financial officer, or hiring an outside kind of bookkeeping service. So that just kind of shows you a little bit about the courses. I'm going to pull my thing back up. So a little bit of the stuff you would have seen as we went through, and then I'll stop and kind of answer questions again, is that, we provide you with step-by-step processes that you can follow. We use real world examples from literacy programs and provide you templates that you can use. We try to connect you with resources, websites, things like that. Uh, Even though we're covering complicated topics, we try to keep those in kind of simple, easy to understand frameworks and vocabulary. And then finally, we are always trying to get you to apply these kind of principles of administration or financial management to your actual literacy program. So we're giving you an opportunity to create your own policy manuals or budgets or things like that. So let me stop here and let's see. Okay, so we had a question about kind of prioritization. So if you're a small literacy program and trying to, you wouldn't be able to do all of these things at once. So how would you approach it? So this is a great question from Kim. So Kim, I would say kind of first of all, the order that we're releasing the courses is the order that kind of the field, when we surveyed them, identified them as like most important. So I would kind of use that as a guide. I think kind of whatever situation you're in probably is going to dictate that too. So if you've never created a budget and it's budgeting time, that's probably the first course you should take. Um, the other piece of it, I would say, is that once you get these courses, you have access to them forever. So you don't have to take the whole thing all at once. You can kind of go in and do pieces of them at a time. The last thing I would say is that idea of not having a lot of time. I would really encourage programs to think about using staff to do some of these activities, especially volunteer staff. Like creating policy manuals and standard operating procedure manuals and things like that. Um, those are processes that if you're in a college town and your college has a business management program or an HR program or something like that, boy, I might look at connecting with some of those students and getting them in there to do some of that administration or HR research and work and putting that stuff together. That's going to be real kind of hands-on experience for them. And the benefit is you won't have to do it. You can focus on creating your budget. At the end, they're going to have good job experience and you're going to have good infrastructure. So that would be kind of how I would approach these things. Um, Question: should strategic planning be a priority during the COVID crisis? Um, so I think I would. That's a great question. I think I would answer that as probably not your first priority. I mean, I think for most of our literacy programs, their first priority during this crisis is really figuring out how to maintain contact with their students and their tutors, how to continue education in uh, kind of whatever format you can. But I would say probably once you've figured that out and feel like you've got a pretty good handle on that, I think strategic planning is a good thing to undergo. I think that what we're seeing as a national organization in talking to literacy programs is that they're starting to recognize that being forced into doing distance learning, while it has been a stressful experience, they're realizing that it is providing them with a lot of opportunities that they wouldn't ordinarily have had. They're seeing students who had dropped out of their program because of childcare issues or transportation issues are coming back into those online courses because it's easier for them to do that. And so they're starting to look at kind of two issues. One is if it's going to be another year, year and a half before we have a vaccine, then that's really the environment that we're going to be instructing in, you know, until people feel comfortable getting back together one-on-one in a library where there's a lot of other people around, or even in a classroom environment. So kind of looking at how do we continue to do this over the next year, and looking at, you know, just kind of larger things about how is this affecting our funding. Are people, you know, donating to our organization, or are they feeling, you know, uneasy about their own financial situations? But then I think there are larger kind of strategies as well of, if distance learning becomes kind of an expectation of students, how are you going to make the most of that? Like, what becomes your volunteer recruiting strategy? What becomes your strategy for purchasing materials that can be used online, things like that? So I would say, yeah, like once you get settled down and kind of deal with the immediate crisis, strategic planning becomes very, very important. Anne had a question about when the classes start and are they free? They are not free. There is a fee for them, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. They are self-paced courses. They are not kind of, you don't enroll with them and then they, you know, go on for like 5 weeks. We have a structured piloting process, but the courses are designed so you can take them at 3 o'clock in the morning if you want to. So they start whenever you're ready to start, and you can go back to them at any time. And another question about cost. Um, are there any resources that would give steps on state funding for our literacy program? So that funding piece is a little bit of that financial management piece and diversification. But also, I would just encourage you to look on the ProLiteracy website and the ProLiteracy Education Network website, where there's a lot more information about grant writing and access to state funding. And especially on the ProLiteracy website, we do a lot of advocacy work to uh, make the federal adult education funding that flows through the state organizations, and in different states it functions differently, but that flows through those state organizations to make sure it's available to community-based nonprofit organizations and not just kind of big adult ed programs. The other place that you might look, depending upon what state you're in, is you might contact your state literacy organization. I think we have about 30, 35 state literacy programs, like Oklahoma Literacy Council, things like that. Florida Literacy Coalition um, are just two that come to mind. Literacy New Jersey is another one that kind of serve as a statewide agency to provide resources and support for those local programs. So they would be able to give you kind of a much better answer that's specific to your state um, for those. Let's see. In terms of credits, I'm going to take this question and then kind of move on. So are credits available for teacher recertification? So we do have exams at the, you know, after you take all the courses that within a topic, you can take an exam. If you get 80% or better on the exam, you can print off a certificate. However, we're not the organization that gets to determine if those are acceptable for your recertification. Whatever your governing body, so assuming it's your kind of state adult education agency that's requiring you to have these credits, they get to make the final determination of if they're going to accept that certificate as part of their credentials requirements. However, I will say we are more than willing to work with any state organization to give them what they need so that they'll accept the courses. So we've done that for a lot of our online courses, and we'll do that for these as well. Typically, what organizations need is kind of an outline of what the topic content is, and they may need to view the course, which we can give them access to, and then an identification of how many hours it should be worth. So that's a determination that that agency makes, but we will kind of help you move that along any way that we can. Okay, so I want to explain kind of the piloting process that we went through, so you can, uh, for two reasons. One, so you kind of have confidence in the content that's in the courses that we've developed already, and also so you can identify if you might be interested in piloting the next round. So what we did in the first two topics, administrative management and financial management, we worked with 8 newly appointed executive directors. So we sought out executive directors from varying sizes of literacy programs. I think our smallest one had a budget of between 10 and 20,000. The largest one had a budget of over $1 million. We were looking for people that had been in that executive role for less than 2 years, so pretty new to that position. The piloting took place between June and September of 2019. We asked each executive director to take the 3 courses, provide feedback on the content of the courses, just, were they engaging and things like that. They participated in 2 group calls and 1 final individual call. And here's the piece that's important. We asked them to identify kind of one piece of information, like creating a budget, that they wanted to implement in their literacy program. We asked them to actually implement it. So if they picked out, I want to create a budget for my literacy program, we asked them to take those steps, take that template, actually create a budget, and then outline for us how that process went, how that budget turned out, and then identify what in the course helped them do that, what else they needed, would have liked to have had that would have helped them create that budget better or easier. So it's not just, we don't just get an evaluation of did you like the content, was it engaging? We actually get an evaluation of, is this content useful to you in doing the things that you need to do? And that's why I said when we came back and we had some of those things about a checklist and some of the things like that, that came out of people actually trying to implement the information that they learned in the courses. So that is really important. And just here are, some people that participated in those pilot projects and kind of what they said. So one person talked about just being in plain speak, so it helped her understand the financial information easier. We had the woman from Butte Literacy Program, and this is one of the small ones. And if I remember correctly, she came in and they had kind of a checkbook, a bank account, and an Excel spreadsheet. And all 3 of those sources had differing amounts of what the literacy program had, like as their funds. So part of what she had to do was kind of be able to piece all that information together and create one kind of comprehensive picture of the financial status of the organization. And then I thought this was really important. She said kind of the accounting course gave her a sense of agency. So once she got her budget kind of in shape, she was able to make recommendations to the board and tell them that her organization was in good financial health. She was able to be confident about that, was able to explain to them why it was in good financial health, was able to explain to them things that they needed to do to their organization to get them in good financial health. So that just kind of having that underlying knowledge base made her feel confident in those financial discussions with her board. Here was one that realized that their organization's funding, they were in good financial health, but their funding wasn't diversified. So they put together kind of a 3-year plan for getting it more diversified. And you see some of the steps that they did here. Uh, Here was one of the persons that attended that actually had a degree in nonprofit management, but no literacy experience. And I think I said this to you earlier. So she knew she needed to create a budget, but the course showed her what went into it. Uh, just that idea of contextualizing that general management knowledge in a literacy situation was very helpful for her. Here was one that came into her situation, and it was the organization was in a financial crisis, so she was able to use that financial information to help her board understand the crisis and how to move forward, and then use the strategic planning information to re-engage the board. And then the last one was Lakeland. They were kind of a unique, or not unique to our literacy programs, but unique in the pilot, in that they were a small literacy project within the larger context of an organization. So one of the things that they kind of appreciated was the balance between short-term kind of necessity guidance and long-term guidance, and just that discussion about the short discussion about the strategic planning and working with the board helped her realize that even though her larger organization has a board, and so she doesn't have to that legal requirement to have a board, that it still would be helpful for her to have a board that could help her, kind of manage the organization, stay connected to the community, provide an advisory role. So she went back and was looking at starting an advisory board to help her interact with community members. And this is for the questions about how much they cost and things like that. So you'll see on the right-hand side of the slide, the courses are normally $45 for ProLiteracy members. For non-members, they're $150. And that is per topic. So the financial management topic has 2 courses in it. The ones we're developing now, the HR and board governance, have 3 courses in them. They're $45 for all 3 of those courses or all 2 of those courses, the whole topic. We have slashed that price for the foreseeable future while programs are dealing with this COVID epidemic. So we've cut the price basically in half, $23. So that's going to go on. I think we've got it planned to go on through the end of July, and at that point we will kind of take an assessment of where things are, and if programs are still struggling, if they're not back meeting, if the financial situation is still kind of dicey, we'll probably extend that price cut for a while longer. And then you see down at the bottom of the slide, there's a URL, proliteracyednet.org/leadership. You can go to that webpage, find out a little bit more about the different topics. And if you have an Education Network account, you can log in from there. If you don't have an account, you can create an account from there. There's also a place if you're interested in getting that organizational member discount there's a place where you can go and sign up your organization to be a member if you're not already. Just a little bit about future piloting. So our original plan was to follow that same process with this next round of courses that we are developing, the board governance and the HR management topics. We are trying to figure out what that looks like in the era of COVID. So we are definitely going to pilot. We're interested in recruiting programs to pilot these next 2 courses. And once we figure out how we're going to do that, we'll take applications. Anybody that's attended these leadership webinars excuse me, will get an invitation to the application. But where we're struggling is we could sign people up to take the courses and evaluate the content, but those pieces about actually implementing, like in the HR course, let's say you wanted to implement a change your performance review process, or you wanted to change the structure of your board. Well, that's going to be really hard to do if your program is not like actually physically meeting with each other. So we've got to figure out kind of what that aspect of the pilot looks like. If we kind of get feedback from content now and wait for the implementation later, or how that's going to look. But we're working on it, trying to figure out what seems reasonable. And when we get kind of those details worked out, we will let you guys know. So I am going to stop now, and I'm going to go through and see what the remaining questions are. Do we already have samples of policies for the coronavirus? So policies about remote work, return to work, things like that. We don't. That's a great question. And I think kind of where we are with that is that not a lot of our programs have those either. And so we're kind of at a point where we are, I think programs are feeling comfortable with their starting to feel comfortable with their distance instruction. And so this is really the next step that they're doing. And so we're kind of developing those with ProLiteracy. And I think as we kind of move into July, that's probably the next thing that we're going to start focusing on is helping programs kind of understand what those issues are and what those policies might look like. Are the classes single user or open to several staff members? They're designed to be single user. So you can't have multiple people take the course and then print out the certificate with multiple people's names on them. So education network accounts are designed to be individual accounts. One kind of caveat to that is if you are a member organization, anybody from your organization that creates an education network account and links that account back to your organization gets that discounted price. So it's really important if you have multiple staff people that want to take these courses to make sure that when they create an account, they create a member account and they enter your organization's member ID number in that form when they create an account, and then they will get that discounted price. Does ProLiteracy have how-to courses for board members? So the course that we have right now is really designed for that executive director to teach them how to interact with the board. We do have other resources on Education Network around the board development, information for board members, but we don't have a how-to course. So I would encourage you to just go on to Education Network, type the word board in the search box, and just look through those resources. You'll probably find some things that will help, but we don't have a comprehensive course. Will the recording of this webinar be available? Yes. So on Friday, you should get a follow-up email with a link to the recording and a link to a certificate, because we know a lot of folks are attending webinars as part of that professional development criteria that your governing body has. So we'll have a certificate available for those of you who attended. Question about, I know these are self-paced, but how long does it take to complete each topic? So we've tried to keep the topics between 1.5 to 3 hours. We tried to kind of cover all the topics that needed to get covered to make people feel comfortable in that role, but not just overwhelm people. So Any individual course, we try to keep between an hour to an hour and a half, and the overall topics, really no more than like three hours. Part of that is also, if you're going through that budgeting course and using that template and actually creating your budget while you're doing that, that's gonna make it more than an hour and a half course. It takes more than an hour and a half to develop a budget. So that's the caveat, is kind of, if you're doing that application piece and like really doing it, that's going to add additional time. Okay, I think that's it for the questions. I'm going to actually unmute my co-workers, Patty and Sarah, and see if they have anything to add. I'm going to start with Patty. Patty, anything you want to say about the two topics that are in development now?
Yes, Todd, actually, it was a great idea and a great question about the sample policies for COVID-19. So that would have been part of the pilot, some specific questions, things that are happening now. So I think that is going to be a great topic, something to cover in the upcoming course.
That's a good point.
Or like special situations to be included now. So great timing.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely why that piloting process is so important. Good point. Sarah, anything you want to add?
No, I don't have anything to add, but we are looking at, like, as Todd mentioned, trying to get the pilots up and running at some point, and trying to figure out what those will look like. So please, if you're a ProLiteracy member, the information will be going out. I believe we're going to pull emails from these webinars and any presentations we've done on it to kind of email out to people to let you know when the piloting applications are being accepted. So if it's something that you're interested in, keep that in mind and be on the lookout for that email coming hopefully in the coming weeks.
Great. And it looks like we do have some questions in the chat room. So so one of the questions is actually a pretty good one. How do you recommend we budget our biennial sizable expense for attending the ProLit conference? Should we budget half of that amount in the off year? So yeah, I think so. Part of it would depend upon, the conference is in the fall, so part of it depends upon when your fiscal year, begins and ends. But for example, our organization, our fiscal year begins July 1st. So if we were budgeting for that, what we might do is budget the registration and the travel in the fiscal year prior to July 1st, kind of knowing that all of that information would come out, and we can make travel arrangements, and we could register for the conference and things like that. And then the expenses of the actual hotel and food and those sorts of things would come out of that following year. So I think it partly just depends on how you can structure things. The other thing that you can do is use that kind of, you saw the slide in the budgeting course, I believe it was, for how to deal with financial shortfalls and creating a cash reserve or a fiscal reserve. So that might be another way of approaching it. It's just building up a cash reserve so that you have that kind of cushion to deal with that sizable expense if your fiscal year doesn't fall where it allows you to kind of split it. Is build up that cash reserve, use that cash reserve, dip into that cash reserve to pay for that, and then replenish your cash reserve after the conference is over, because you'll have, another year and a half to build that back up. Great question. Let's see. In an organization with a 4,000 to 6,000 annual budget, is it advisable to revise the budget during the course of the year? I would say, yeah, I think it's always advisable to, have specific check-in points where you look at the budget and see if you're on target. I mean, really, you should be doing that monthly and not just looking at where you are in terms of your expenditures, but also being able to predict your income flows and kind of knowing that you're on target. And if you see, I mean, you may not want to make adjustments, a couple of months into your budget uh, necessarily, but you want to know that if things are not coming in the way you think, you want to be aware of that, and you want to have some contingency plans. But yeah, I think no matter what the size of your budget is, you want to review it on a monthly basis, kind of check in at where you are with your different spending categories, with your different income categories, and make adjustments. Let's see. To verify financial management is one topic, $23, and administrative management is one topic, $23. That is correct. Let's see. How do you find out if you are a member? So you can, is it membership at proliteracy.org or member at proliteracy.org? Patty and Sarah, do you remember the email address?
Yes, it's already posted.
Oh, it's membership at proliteracy.org.
proliteracy.org.
Yeah, so
Yes.
if you need to check on your membership, you can email membership at proliteracy.org. Is there a chat or forum for people taking these courses? So right now, some of the courses have discussions. So there would be a chat or a forum for that particular course. We haven't created an overall chat room for like the wider scope of courses, but that's a great idea. So maybe that's something that we would implement when we get these next two courses launched. So we have 4 topics and an opportunity for more robust discussion. So I think kind of creating a larger forum where people can have discussions about the courses and other kind of executive director topics is a great idea. Let's see. How long does the pilot take? The pilot takes about, ideally, it takes about 3 months. So the idea is the courses you can take, I mean, most people took them within the first week of the pilot. And then the rest of it is just kind of thinking about what it is from those courses that you want to implement. And we encourage you to kind of pick something small and focused. One of our programs really needed to implement strategic planning. We kind of recognized that she wouldn't be able to do the whole strategic planning process in the 3 months. So we focused with her on creating a plan and kind of outlining the steps of, when it would be scheduled, what they would focus on, the research that needed to be done beforehand, finding someone to lead the strategic planning, things like that. So the pilot is really designed to take about 2-3 months at the most. And are we collecting info from member organizations of where their funding trends are going this year? Yes. So every member organization, and this is just a plug for those of you who are members, each year a survey goes out. It's called the annual member survey. I think we just sent out the email for the annual member survey towards the end of April. So you should have gotten that, or somebody in your organization should have gotten that email. It links to a form for you to put in your data. We collect data about your number of students, who they are, their reading levels coming in, things like that. We collect information about your volunteers, who they are, how you recruited them, information about your budget and funding sources and all of that. And then I think we close that survey by the end of summer, and then we kind of compile those results and put out a statistical report around the beginning of the year. So the statistical report for this past year will probably come out around December, January of this year. we try to ask the same questions year after year so we can also do comparisons, kind of historical comparisons, and see if those funding sources are changing. So great question. Okay. Can any of the members of a literacy program take the courses? Yes, they can. Yes, so we talked about, that's a great question, Mayu. So we talked about who the audience was when we wrote these, but it's not just limited to that. Like, you don't have to be an executive director. You can be a board member or just a staff person that is looking at kind of advancing yourself in the organization. So they are open to anybody. It's just important to kind of understand who the target audience was when we designed them. So, all right, I think that's all of the questions. If unless I missed one, Sarah, Patty. So let me just say again, thank you all for attending. This has been great, and thank you for your interest. If you have any questions, you can email any of us, and I will ask everyone. I will put my email information in the chat box, and I'll ask Patty and Sarah to do the same. And just thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of the day. And as I said, you should get a email by Friday that has a link to the recording of this webinar and a certificate for those of you who attended.